The world is saved. The living room's dark, save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, George.
Hey, Lions, how's it going?
It's hot. I mean,
It's too hot.
I have some folks I know that live in Australia, and right now we are in North America. It is summer where we are when we are. And the people in Australia that are complaining about it being cold, it is not cold. It is cold for them, for their location. But I'm just like, oh, God, guys, if my summer is this hot and your winter is that hot, that is not a good sign on the direction that temperature is going.
Yes, no, co-sign that. And like, I know that in D&D, the exhaustion mechanic, like nobody likes it because like it just makes the game harder to play. It makes you feel less powerful. And so a lot of times when people are like, oh, my character could, withstand extreme heat. No, I am suffering multiple levels of exhaustion because like I was walking upstairs. I'm like, God, I'm just so tired and I'm sweaty and I feel gross. And I was like, going to like move something off the bed and like toss it to my other hand, and I missed. I'm like, well, there's disadvantage on ability checks. And as I trundled down the stairs, I'm like, clearly my speed is halved. And then when the dog leapt at me in joy for me being home, I couldn't swat her out of the way. So obviously I'm rolling disadvantage on attack rolls and saving throws. And then it nudged me ever so slightly, and I hemorrhaged blood everywhere and lost consciousness. So obviously my hit point maximum was halved, and my speed was then reduced to 0.
Yeah. Which really, people complain that D&D is not realistic, but it's nice to know that some of the mechanics are just based on true life.
Yeah, no, dude, it's hot.
Yes, I hate it so much. But we soldier on. We did play a bunch of video games, but we're going to talk about 2 specific video games today. But first, I have to let people know that if they like what we're doing, they can leave us reviews. They can send in forum requests, suggest games and crap for us to play. They can do all the things that are in the show notes because I just get tired of listing them. I'm lazy and old. But all that stuff is in the show notes. If folks support us at a high enough level on the Patreon, they don't just get the after show, though. They also get the shout out. So we need to thank first our 4-bit portables, Brad, Josh, Keith, our 8-bit classics, Yarno, Jay Brent, and John, and our 16-bit hero, Michael.
And for $1,000, we will make you some soup. But hey, it's really good soup, though.
Really good soup.
Like really good soup. I feel like I can't sell enough this soup, but it's worth it.
Yeah, that's important.
Yeah. It's good soup.
Yeah, and you'll know for $1,000.
Yeah. For $1,000, you can see exactly how good. Please don't call us on this. I don't want to make soup.
Because it's too hot. See what you did there?
Yeah.
So we have a mailbag question, and I think this is a good question for some of the stuff we talked about last episode, some of the stuff we're going to talk about on this episode, and just being frustrated with the heat. Have you ever actually thrown a controller in frustration? And if so, how much of the circumstances are you willing to recount for us into a microphone?
So you go first, because I feel like mine's going to be a little bit more droll.
So I have done what any reasonable person would call throwing a controller, right? Where like the controller was in my hands and then I was frustrated and it was out of my hands more than
at a velocity of greater than 1 meter per second, right?
Yeah, but what I've never done is taken it and pitched it, right? I've never spiked it into the ground like I just made a touchdown. I've never, thrown a fastball into the sheetrock and, buried it up to the dual analog sticks. But what I have done is more like what you would call throwing it in disgust, right? As opposed to like in violent anger where you're just like, come on. And you just like open hand, like out into the air and it just goes spinning. And there are times that I have done that with like a certain amount of control and precision and like kind of like onto the couch or onto the bed, like when I was a kid, like next to me. So I definitely threw it in frustration, but I knew like, oh, it's going to land somewhere gently. But then there's like a couple of times where I have absolutely been like, oh, come on, and like onto like tile.
Nice.
And ruined
like,
that controller.
Yep. No, that's...
And the good news is that each time, because that's probably only happened like twice, maybe 3 times, where it like connected with something hard and damaged the controller, is the gap in between the first time and the second time was pretty long. And then the gap in between the second time and the third time was like much longer. And then I don't have any memories of doing it since I was like over 20, right?
So
I have done.
You might
it.
have like one more in your lifetime.
Might, yeah. Hopefully I still have a lot of video games left in me. So like statistically, the chance has not gone down to 0. But if I'm 75 and some crazy VR game where I'm like in my haptic suit makes me like punch the side of the haptic machine that has the omnidirectional treadmill, like, all right.
What? Hang on, I think I can do the math on this. So let's say, because this is important, let's say that you did it one of the second time. Let's say you did it 3 times. The second time you did it when you were 15, and the third time you did it when you were like 20, right? And let's say that the first time you did it when you were 14. So let's say you did it with 14, 15, and 20, right? Because that you said that it was like longer in between each stretch, right? So that would mean that if you did it right now, right? So the first time 1 year passed, the second time 5 years passed, right? So that means if you did it right now, then that means 19 years would pass, right? And so that means that, which would be immediate, right? And that means that the next one would have to be 90 years in the future beyond that. So I should throw it on purpose today, so that last one I'll never get there. Well, but that's the thing, is that the longer you wait to throw it, the further away that fifth one would be. So you literally, no matter when in your lifetime you throw it, if you continue the trend, you have one more in you.
Okay,
so
that's reasonable. That's reasonable.
Yeah,
I do want to be clear. The few times that the controller struck something and like got messed up, I never broke one. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like they survived. They were screwy after, like a little chip out of the plastic kind of thing, but like I never smashed one in frustration, and then because that would just, one, hurt my heart too much because I love controllers, and two, like modern controllers are so expensive that there's no way that would make me feel better.
Right. And I feel like I should probably ask this: was the hard thing ever a human?
Floor.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, just making sure.
Yeah.
Just
no.
Record,
it was, the circumstances were always the same, right? It was the frustrated like flip out of the hand. Yep. It's just the first few times when I was a kid, they had soft things to land on, and then in like teen years, hard floors.
See, so I like this because I feel that both of our responses to this can kind of like distill into maybe not the people that we are, but the characters that we generally play out in the world, right? So I have never thrown a controller, and here's why: is because I knew if I got angry enough, when I was a kid, it was externally driven, and when I was an adult, it was internally driven. If I ever got angry enough to throw a controller, that meant I had a problem. Like that would be indicative of like, I am too involved in this game. I don't have enough emotional control. I have to stop playing for sure right now, and possibly for a while, right? So like it was like, I can't.
So it would be what that action would represent was unacceptable to you,
right? It would be like that's like the equivalent of like getting a DUI, right? Of like that's throwing and breaking the controller is the video game equivalent of getting a DUI, right? Where it's just like, I might have a problem, right? What I have done though is like grit my teeth and flexed the controller with my hands, where like you can hear the plastic like bending and like so like it would have been way worse if I literally wrenched the controller apart in my hands. Like that would have been way worse, but like no one could see that. That's not like this big explosive anger. That's a slow simmering anger while I've got a big smile on my face. And I feel like that's kind of how we process anger, right? Is it like you had like the big explosive animated thing, and I was just like, no, this is fine,
Yeah, I would say based on what I know of each of us, that is highly representative. Yeah, which now
right?
I think we need to make like either like a dating app or like a meet a new friend app that uses this as like a Teen Vogue personality question.
How do you, or like, it could be if you were like a psychologist, you know, and you're filling out, it's like, when you get angry at a video game, how do you process that anger? Do you A, toss the controller at the TV, B, you know, and then it goes from there. But,
you know what that always makes me think of? I'm sorry, I just have to get this thought out of my head or it will haunt me. When I first started working as a teenager was when they started doing like the stupid like psych tests. Like some companies would do them. And I remember taking one that was like 90 questions. It was huge. And part of the reason they did that is so they could sneak the same question in worded slightly differently to see if they could like catch you out. And the one that just always stuck with me, because I was like, who is stupid enough to fail this part, was if you had access to the till and the till had like $5 extra in it, would you take the $5 extra?
Yes.
And then like 20 questions later, it's like, say you find out the till is $10 over. Would you ever take that $10? And like 25, 30 questions later, it's like, you have learned that the till has an extra dollar bill in it. Would you take the extra dollar bill if you would not get caught? It's just like, who fails the yes, I will steal from you questionnaire before they're hired? I mean, like, I get that's a way to filter people out, but like, only the stupidest people would be caught by that bear trap, right? This isn't a way to like catch actual bears. This is a way to catch people who are looking to have their leg cut off.
That reminds me of there's a great Parks and Rec thing where Andy says he's taking the police academy like personality test exam, and he gets a question way wrong before this that kind of sets the scene. But then like the officer says like, you're on patrol and an 8-year-old child asks to see your service revolver. Do you hand it to him? He goes like, absolutely. When I was a kid, I used to always want to hold a police officer's gun, and making that dream come true for a child, that's what being a cop is all about. It's just like that what you described is the equivalent of that, where it's like, who gets the give the child the gun question wrong? Somebody like Andy from Parks and Rec.
Somebody does. All right. We played games, and you played a game that you have been talking about, dare I say, dreaming about for months, not years, months at least.
Oh, well, definitely years, because like since Darkest Dungeon came out, I've been like excited about Darkest Dungeon 2, and then Darkest Dungeon 2 came out, but it was only for PC, and that was like at least a year ago. Feels like a year.
You know, you might be right. I just don't remember a time before you were gushing about Darkest Dungeon, so it's hard for me. I had to get a new calendar. Like there
is no time before Darkest Dungeon, for it is only Darkest Dungeon. And so I did it, man. I downloaded the game remotely to my PlayStation from Colorado, so that way there would be no latency. Right, the minute the kids went to bed, I had that sucker booted up. And I sat down to play it, fingers itching with anticipation, and it's all right.
Good episode.
Yeah. No. So it is just that. It is, so far from the time I've been able to play it, it is okay. It's enjoyable. Like, so I am enjoying playing it. I intend to continue playing it. It's just not Darkest Dungeon, and they've made a number of mechanical tweaks that like take away. I think that there are some people that did not like Darkest Dungeon that would now like this game, you know, because they're deliberate decisions, and they're not bad decisions, but they are, you know, very, very different than the original. But they suppressed some of the things I liked about the original. So, in the original, the idea. So the main issue that I have is ludonarrative dissonance. Right, this game has a ton of it, and a lot of games have a ton of ludonarrative dissonance, but
that's surprising, because I would say the first one actually was, the whole point is kind of to couple the narrative and the mechanics in a way that is very tightly coupled.
Right. And that's the thing, is that's what I was expecting from this one, right? No, they decoupled a lot of it, and I think it was for quality of life improvements to the game. So the game plays a lot better, or I guess more seamlessly, you know? But so in the first game, right, you are your ancestor done up, right? And they, release some eldritch nonsense into your, ancestral home, and you are going there to clear all that stuff out, right? And so as they're doing that, they get money, which you use to hire more people and train them up to go in there and clear out your house. As you're doing it, you kind of get the feeling like, hey, if I don't do this, I feel like the world might end. But like that's like a creeping thing that kind of onsets towards the end of the game of like, the scope of this was undersold to me, but that's part of the game, right?
That's also part of cosmic horror, right? Is that
right.
Each time you think, oh, this horrible thing that I saw in the woods is the worst thing I've ever seen. And then you go into the mansion and you see the worst thing you've ever seen. Then you go into the basement of the mansion and you see things your brain cannot comprehend because they are so horrible. Like that's
right.
That escalation is not, I don't know if that's just a pure horror thing, but it's definitely a cosmic horror thing.
Yeah. And I mean, like one of the things the Darkest Dungeon 1 did famously that I love is that, and minor spoilers, is that after you beat the first cosmic horror, it occasionally replaces very briefly the portraits of your heroes with like eldritch creatures, but just for an instant. So that way you, the player, are like, wait, what? And then the first time it happened to me, like I paused and then immediately looked up whether or not this was a thing. And I found out that, yes, the game is screwing with me. But that moment is what they were going for of like wait, I'm not, that was not the portrait, right? That. So all of that beautiful chef's kiss, loved it, right? Especially because like it puts you, the player, as like the, like what choices are you going to make? Are you going to be the hard taskmaster? Or are you going to like try to treat your people humanely? Like what all of that. Love everything about it. In Darkest Dungeon 2, it's framed as though the world has already ended and like you are trying to basically stop further eldritch nonsense from like coming out from the mountain. So but it's unclear exactly what the scope is. Like, has the whole world ended? Is the world in the process of ending and it's just your region that is all screwed up? Like what's going on, right?
Even without knowing that, right? That immediately casts the characters that would you call it a party that you control, like in your little party? They are heroes because this is a normal set of circumstances that they are working against. Whereas in the first game, it is an unusual set of circumstances that they don't even realize they have been like tricked into.
Right. Well, and also too, they were hirelings. You literally hired them, what was it? Brigands and fools and outlaws, soon to be bodies, right? Or suffered not the broken horse or the broken man. So anyways, so there's that. So to your point, right, is that like they're trying to save the world now, and it's like, oh no, that's not what we were doing before. Before we were just doing this semi-banal task that like slowly became like this, like, oh wait, we may have screwed something up here. So there's that, but they made a huge mechanical change that I get why they did it, and it makes for interesting gameplay, but it completely shatters some of the narrative for me. So in the original, you had your party and you went into the dungeon, and they took damage and got stressed out as you went about, right? And you could leave at any time, right, and take your stuff with you. But it stressed everyone out, and stress damage was difficult to heal, as it is in real life, right? So in this one, you can abandon your journey with your stagecoach whenever you want. There's no penalty for doing that. You can just kind of walk away, which is weird considering that you're trying to save the world. That feels weird. But instead what they did is like the World of Warcraft thing where they give you rewards if you soldier on. So if you make it to the nearest inn, then you get more candles, which is what you use to upgrade your stuff, right? But you can walk away whenever you want. So I'm like, okay, that is fine. But the way they expect you to end a quest is either by defeating the eldritch horror that you have set out to defeat, or a TPK. Like, they expect a TPK, and then when you then reload, like you do your next run, all of your heroes are still there. Like if and it's the same. It's not the same class. It's the same named hero. So like I'm like, what? No, Dismas died. I watched him die. It was heartbreaking. And I also know that's the same hero because you learn their backstory as you're playing, and it's their specific backstory. It's not just like random Hellion A. It is, Alicia or whatever her name is, right? So I'm like, and there are some things that minor tweaks that they could make that I think that could help with this. For example, so like I said, like that's the way it stands. And right now, none of it's really, and I haven't been playing for a tremendous amount of time, but none of it's truly clear what all is like the grander picture or what all is going on or why should I care? Especially if the world's already over, like there's a bit more like apathy as opposed to like I'm trying to stop the world from ending. But I say all that to say that like if they were saying, hey, because it is framed that you and the ancestor brought on this nonsense, right? So like you are also like an occultist. Is if it was like hey, you're raising the dead every time you do this, like every time you reset, and their pain is real. Like they feel the pain of death and they want to die, but they know that they can't because, they've got to go save the world, right? So like, if they just told me that, I'd be like, okay, I'm in again, right? Because now I don't want them to die because I don't want them to experience death. But as opposed to like, well, they died, and now I've got somebody who looks and acts and talks exactly like them, or maybe is them, but do they have their memories? And I don't know, and
Well, especially if you are trying to like trickle out the backstory, right? That seems like it has become a staple of the roguelite genre, very famously done in the last few years by Hades, right? Is like Zagreus, is that his name?
Mm-hmm.
He eats it, and then you get a little bit more story, and then you do another run, and he eats it, and you get a little bit more story, right? But it makes sense that he like kind of can't die, and because he lives in hell, like going to hell when you die is like, yep, right? So there's narrative explanations for the loop, right? And that's another thing that has kind of become very common in roguelites is, you need to know that the characters understand that they're in a time loop or whatever. That's fine. It can be done in a hackney way and it can be done in a good way. But if the whole point of this universe, the Darkest Dungeon universe, is like death is real and scary and people don't want to die, then you just sub out something for death that still mechanically behaves similarly, right? So maybe you don't ever take physical damage to the point where you die, or when you hit 0 hit points, what actually happens is you've lost your will to fight and you run screaming into the woods, and then there's some amount of time before that character can be used in your party again, but they always come back because then you get to evolve their story over time, but they come back with some penalty, and then you get the same mechanic as in the first game where you gotta like relieve the stress damage from them, right? But that's a way to say, well, because people know how dangerous the world is, they don't get into a situation where death is so likely. Whereas in the first game, they went off to their death because they didn't know what they were getting into, right? These people, you could do a similar mechanical thing, but allow the same characters to narratively grow over the course of the game. If they don't air quotes die, right? They go, screaming into the woods, or they lose their sanity and pass out or something. They panic and they use their teleportation crystal that brings them back to something, right? Some bullshit driving. So like, I'm already feeling like, okay, this is giving up a lot of the horror vibes and turn this more into like gothic adventure game. But what else you got for me? Like, what other weird quality of life things sort of changed the theming?
Yeah. So one of the other things. So just to go back to the death mechanic, and then there's one other mechanic I want to discuss is so in the original one, right? It's the feeling was so much different. So like, let's say that you had a party member die, right? Or let's say that you've got, all 4 of your party members, they're really low on health and they're all pretty stressed out. And so you're not sure, like, do I press on and attempt to complete the mission, or do I send them home? So like, here's what you're weighing in that moment. You're just like, if I send them home, that's going to stress them all out. So not only is that difficult and expensive to heal, but also like there's the emotive thing of like, I will be stressing out all of these characters, right? So like, and I won't get the golden bauble that I want or whatever thing it is. Like I won't finish the quest, so I won't get the thing, but everyone will survive, and I will get all of the stuff that I currently have, So that's a real like nail biting decision where you're like, maybe one more encounter. I'll push it for one more, and then but what if somebody dies? If they die, they're just dead forever. You know, so it's like, well, is it worth it? Is it not? And I remember there were a couple times where I was just like sitting there, controller in hand, like just staring at the screen and just running this math in my head over and over again and being like, I don't know. And I love that feeling, right? In this one, I had a run where like two of the characters. So one, whenever they're taking damage or whatever, I'm like, okay, you know, that's fine. And so also like none of your healing abilities work unless they're below a certain amount of health, which I get that from like you know, you're on the edge of your seat. But that means also there are literally times when I am asking for people to take damage so I can heal them, which is counterintuitive and also like not what you want from a horror narrative thing where you're like, please, chainsaw monster, hit me one more time so that way I can heal. Like that's not what you're looking for, right?
I think that was what the Britney Spears song was actually about. The baby in "Hit Me, Baby, One More Time" is a chainsaw monster.
Hit me, baby, one more. So, oh, that went right. Anyways, so in this one, I was doing a run where two of my characters died, right? And I was like 3 paces away from the end. From the inn, where like I would get extra things for having gone to the inn, and I was just like, well, one, I don't care that 2 of my characters die. I feel nothing because they will be alive. They'll be waiting for me back there, you know. So they just got like laser tagged out of the laser tag arena and are just sitting on the bench now, waiting to come back in. In fact, I would be doing them a disservice by trying to complete the mission because they don't get to play the game anymore, right? But also too, is I was just like, I'm just gonna quit. Because it feels sloggy to try to fight all of these fights with only 2 heroes. I will probably fail. And that was like a known math. Like I was like, if I'm doing good with 4 people, I will probably do poorly with 2. So I was like, I'm just going to quit, you know? And so I quit and they were like, are you sure you'll get more candles? I'm like, yeah, no, I get more, but like I get all of my stuff now. And if I quit right now, I will have lost nothing. All of my people will be back at 100% ready to go, and I will not have spent another hour of my time trying to throw good money after bad in terms of time. So I was like, whatever. And I felt nothing, you know? Like I was just like, you know, and again, like I am feeling joy from playing the game. The game is fun mechanically, but like as far as that like tense, like, oh my gosh, nail biting, like horror on the edge of my seat, I was like, you know, I'll take another swing. I'll do another run, you know? And that's not what you want in a horror game, right? Like if it's just like, I'll take another swing at it. It felt very similar to that one game I was playing where I got killed by the chainsaw guy like for the 5th time, and I was like, I guess I'll take another swing at it. Like it stopped being scary at that point. The difference between that game and this one is that all that game offered was horror. This game offers other things. The last thing I will say about the mechanic, I mean, I could go on forever, but one of the other big changes that I've noticed is do you remember how the stress mechanic worked in the original game?
Mostly the animation and noise of the like the thing appears over their head and they're like, because that like became a meme.
Hell yeah.
But I think as when you reached high enough stress, you could get like weird effects where you like became a zealot or you became panicked, and like then you might lose some control over the character and they would behave erratically depending on like the way they had flipped out. Is this accurate at all?
Yeah, nailed it. Yeah,
okay.
Better than one. So like you would, when you hit 100 stress, you could, you would freak out. There was like a 10% chance that you could like steal yourself, you know?
Oh, yeah, which always felt like super triumphant.
Right? Because like it almost never happened, but man, when it happened, that was awesome. And you're like, yeah, you know? But the thing was that you were managing to you tried to keep stress low because chances are they were going to freak out, right? And then you did lose some, but not all control over the character, right? Because like if they became masochistic, once in a while they would refuse healing, you know? And so not all the time. It wasn't like they were now unhealable, in which case you were like, oh, well, they became masochistic, they're dead. You know, it was like, maybe they'll let me heal them. And then you go to heal them and you're like, nah, not this time. And you're like, come on, man, don't be this way. All right, fine. Then this is what I'm going to do, you know? So all of that. It's great mechanic. Loved it. This one, when you get stressed out. Oh, and then also that was when you hit 100. When you hit 200 stress, you ran the chance of having a heart attack and dying. So even after you had a breakdown, you still needed to manage their stress, you know? For this one, when you gain the maximum amount of stress, your resolve is tested, and you either steal yourself, I forget what they call it, or you have a meltdown. Two problems. One is that the chance for you stealing yourself is way higher. Just because, you know, like from the 30 times I've had people melt down, right? Yeah, like I'd say probably it's like a 75-25% chance, maybe a 70-30, you know? So substantially more. Less likely to happen than the bad thing, but still likely to happen. And if you become, and so if you steal yourself, you gain full hit points and all of your stress goes away.
Oh, so you center yourself and find your inner resolve and decide you can throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. Like, what the hell?
Right. Yeah,
this
exactly.
Is not horror.
Right. Yes. Now, if you have a meltdown, you go to 10% hit points, right? So you go to 10% hit points, right? And but you also still, it resets your stress. Your stress goes down to 0, right? So that makes for weird, like, gameplay decisions, you know, because one is now, in my opinion, managing stress and trying to keep it low is not a high priority because there's a high enough chance that they're going to steal themselves, and it's a good thing. So, like, having their stress amp up could very well be a good thing, but also, too, is that there were some times where somebody was like, their stress was like getting higher, and I'm like, push it higher, because right now their hit points are at 20%. So I'm only going to lose 10% of their hit points, and it will reset their stress to 0. If they're going to melt down, now is the time. Please continue to stress this person out. Is there any way I can stress them out to force this situation? Because worst case scenario, they melt down and I lose 10% of health. Fart noise, who cares? Best case scenario, they steal themselves and I get 80% of my health back. That's amazing, right? Like, that's a good thing. So, like,
this sounds like by streamlining some of the mechanics and by tweaking some of the other mechanics, they have built a game that plays like Darkest Dungeon and it should not be Darkest Dungeon.
No.
Right? Like, it is now like adventurers punch Cthulhu in the face.
Which is why it's like, this isn't Darkest Dungeon. Why would you call it that on your menu? Which does elegantly lead us to, and we can talk about this subject matter after we go through your thing, but to how much is in service to the brand important? Because as I was playing this, I was like, one of the upsides is that this is not, one of the downsides is this is not Darkest Dungeon, right? One of the upsides is this is not Darkest Dungeon. So, you know, we can discuss that in a minute, but you played a video game.
Yeah, no, I want to talk about Black Mesa in a minute, but I want to stay on this so we're in the right headspace, because the ludonarrative checker for Darkest Dungeon was not in the right headspace. I think in service to the brand is a super fraught thing, and it is a huge part of the reason sequels are hard, right? Like, sequels are hard. Movies, books, TV shows, kids, right? The second time is difficult in ways that are unique. I know what I said. I'm just wondering how old your kids are going to be when they listen to this. The second time is difficult in ways that are unique to subsequent attempts, right? The first time can't have some of those problems. And mechanically, all the things you're describing, because I am less enamored with the original Darkest Dungeon than you are, and these all still sound like super interesting mechanical trade-offs to make, right? So it's like, oh, okay, I'm in this situation where I have a decent chance of stealing myself. And if I steal myself, then that's cool. But if I take the risk, then, like, they're going to drop hit points, but their stress will clean out. And then I just have to make sure they don't die before I can heal them up, right? So, like, mechanically, that is an interesting choice, depending on, like, how damage is doled out and how turns work, right? But, like, that is a Doom 2016 style, like, rush up and put yourself in danger to get the reward, right? But Doom, despite
Doom,
all of its monsters and stuff, is not a horror game. It is
not a horror game.
Super, and it is a spooky action hero game, right?
Right.
And this feels like that is what they did, either on purpose or by accident, but like tweaking some of these decisions has put you in a position where you are no longer, you're not afraid of death, right? You're not afraid of insanity. You're not afraid of the penalties. And that's not what you were willing to give up. Like that is the thing about Darkest Dungeon that really had you like wrapped up into what the characters were going through, what was happening in the world, right? Like otherwise it's just heroes punch monsters. Like there's infinity games where heroes punch monsters, but like you really enjoyed the theming and the vibe, right? The feeling that you got from the way that the mechanics played out narratively. And it's, I think, bad that they chose to make that change and also stick to that brand. Like I would almost say, hey, developers, put a different name on this one. Don't call it a sequel. Like you have some mechanical things you want to do differently and it changes the vibe of the game. Like, great. Say, this is another game in maybe even in the Darkest Dungeon universe, but it's set 100 years before the ancestor and you are aspiring to stop him. So you're heroes. And now these more heroic mechanics kind of make sense because the world isn't screwed and you're trying to prevent it from becoming screwed. But of course, the looming horror is that we all know eventually the ancestor does summon Cthulhu and things are bad, right? Like there are ways you could handle this in like a brand sensitive way, I guess.
Right. And actually, so a couple of ways that I would have changed it to have brought it closer to what I wanted. One, I would keep the recruiting heroes mechanic, I just like that, right? Like I like that you recruit heroes. And if you wanted to tell like the hero's story, maybe like each hero class like had like the class master and like that's the person whose story you're hearing, and they're the ones who are like going out and finding other people who like have their skill sets, and they're being sent off to die. And that would again have the people who we're learning about and the quote important people are taking none of the risk, the same way that you were the important person and took none of the risk before. So like if you wanted to tell the story of the Crusader, like tell that story. I want to hear that story, but like still make death have meaning, right? And then also too, if they wanted to increase the scope, what I said is in my head. This is my headcanon, is that this takes place in a universe where you failed to stop the ancestors, abominations before, where you lost in Darkest Dungeon 1, which would be very in keeping with Darkest Dungeon, right? It's just like you failed. Yeah,
even canonically things did not go right.
Right, exactly. You are playing in the Legend of Zelda universe where Link did not defeat Ganon, right? And so that's why the world is suddenly ending now, And instead of like having areas of your mansion that you explore, have areas of the region that you explore. And then they can be also very incredibly varied. And like you could add in some different mechanics and all that kind of stuff. And like so, but all of that being said, is that as I was talking to a friend, I said, look, there is no reason for anyone to ever play Borderlands, in my opinion, because Borderlands 2 is better in every way. It is just a better game. It has better mechanics. It has better game feel. It has better items. It has better characterization. It is a better, superior game. The only reason to go play Borderlands is if you're a completionist and you love the Borderlands series, right? I would never recommend it to anybody. I'd always recommend Borderlands 2 because why, right? This game does not now preclude the existence of Darkest Dungeon, right? It doesn't. Like, I will still go back and play Darkest Dungeon, right? So I think that there is potentially something to be said for being like, hey, we're going to make a new game, and we're going to make it different enough that the old game is still worth playing, So I think that there is some positive to be said there, but man, it very much so.
You nailed a specific framing of that I think is relevant for a game like this in particular, right? Because like Borderlands has a pretty good story, like it's interesting and it's fun, but like you're mostly there for the pew pew pew, right? Like that is pretty much why you play a game like Borderlands, right? And nothing against that, but like it is a lot of really excellent pew pew pew, and then also like pretty solid story. Like thanks for including that nice story. Darkest Dungeon, I would say the story and the narrative and the theming is like probably a pretty big part of why you're there, right? Hades, again, like not to drag on it too much, but like Hades also was like that, right? Whereas like Enter the Gungeon, which was also an excellent roguelite, I kind of like plateaued pretty early on like what is going on in the universe and like what is this place and why am I here? Like I just, okay, like funny guns, ha ha ha, right? But it was like, but the mechanics were super fun. So like playing the game was super fun. With Darkest Dungeon 1 and 2, you're talking about like service to the brand, like the second game can be mechanically different without like obviating the first game if there is a overarching narrative that is like really important, right? If you start Darkest Dungeon 2 and it's like, oh, hey man, you can play the second one without ever having played the first one, but like you really should play the first one, right? You need, Back to the Future 2 makes a lot less sense without Back to the Future 1. Like, can you watch it by itself? I guess. But like you really kind of need that backstory, right? The Two Towers makes a lot less sense without the Fellowship of the Ring. Like you really need that backstory. And even though like there are things in Back to the Future 2 that are better in some ways, it's a worse movie than Back to the Future 1, so there's not a perfect analogy, but like there are some things that it's like, oh, the effects are a little better and they have like a little bit more of a budget, but you need that story, right? So that's in a situation like this, like if you want to change some things mechanically and make the game play a little bit differently and handle a little bit differently, you should still make the narrative necessary to retrieve. So if someone's like, oh, should I play Darkest Dungeon 2? That you would confidently say, yes, you absolutely should after you play Darkest Dungeon 1.
Well, I think that one of the main issues I have with it thus far is that I think that they said, what are the core aesthetics of the game? And somebody's like, dude, narrative, 100% narrative. And it's like, okay, cool. And then they said, let's do more of that. And to be fair, they did, right? Like each character now has like a fully fledged backstory, right? And so like, why are they here? And why are they adventuring, right? Whereas the last one didn't have any of that. What they did do is they had backstories for the monsters, like the bosses that you fought. And each time you fought, because you fought each boss 3 times, each time you fought them, like you got a little bit more of the story, and it was always increasingly horrifying and awesome. God, I always remember the prophet, where it's just like,
is the one who's got his eyes in his hand?
Yeah. Where like his whole thing was, it was just like he kept prognosticating like that doom was coming, and no matter like he put the ancestor put the guy in stocks and like whipped him and burned him in acid, and like just no matter what, he just kept praying and all this sort of stuff. And then he was like, okay. And then he took him down and showed him the horror in the basement, and that's what broke him. And he ripped out his eyes and became like a permanent zealot of the area. And I'm like, that's good horror, man. That's a good story, right? But what I think that where they lost it is they were like, okay, narrative's important. Let's get more narrative in there. What they lost was how they told the story in the first one. And they told the story in the first one through their mechanics. The mechanics told the story. They didn't have a ton of narrative, not a ton of dialogue. Like the ancestor had like, a bunch of stuff that he said, but it was very limited. I'm sure there's way more ancestor dialogue. I'm sure there's more backstory. I'm sure there's all this, but I'm told all of it. I don't feel the horror. I don't feel that everything's terrible, as opposed to like, when the ancestor says like, oh, there's this terrible, horrible thing in the basement. And you're like, yeah, all right, but I'm pretty awesome. And then first of all, like, so let's say that like you go to fight the dark, the thing, right? He's like, dude, there's this big terrible thing. You're like, yeah, but I'm a hero, so whatever, right? The first time you're like, so I'm going to take my party, we're going to go in there, we're going to crush the darkest dungeon, we're going to move out. And the heroes are like, dude, no, it's suicide. I won't go there. Are you insane? And you're like, oh, well, maybe I should take this seriously. And then you finally get them powerful enough for them to be like, yeah, we agree with you now, like ancestors, progeny. We are powerful enough for this thing. And then you go in and you get riggedy wrecked. You're like, oh no, that tells a story, right? This just tells you a story, right? You don't experience the story, which is where, we've said many times, like where video games can really make a difference,
So I'm curious because I don't remember from firsthand experience. You're playing Darkest Dungeon 1. You have a hero who's, is it like 10 is like the max level or something?
6.
Okay. So you have a hero that eats it at level 4, right? Mm-hmm. Hero's dead, permanently dead.
Yep.
When you recruit a new hero, do you have to recruit a level 1 hero?
So you can upgrade, and that's where the upgrades come in. You can upgrade the carriage, and that increases the maximum level of the heroes that come in, but you still could get a level 0 hero. You could get a level, 4 hero, I think is as high as it goes, So if you want a level 6 hero, you got to get them from 4 to 6. But so then every week you check the carriage and you're like, oh my goodness, there's a level 4 hero. But they're a class that I don't use a lot of. But I've got this level 2 hero. I'm not really using them a lot. Should I get rid of them? Right. And then not only are you wrestling with that decision, but then when you do decide, you know what, I'm probably not going to use this other hero, I'll just get rid of them. It's just never suffer, eyes wide and a stumbling gait. He is of no more use to us. And you're like, well, thanks, man.
So in Darkest Dungeon 2, somebody eats it. Is there any penalty of any kind other than for that immediate run? Is that character changed at all? Do they lose any levels? Do they nothing?
Nothing that I can see. I think that I saw somewhere in the rules that if you pull together your exact same party as before, some of their relationships will move into the next one. But as far as damage that individual person took, especially if it was any negative quirks, negative trick, anything like that, all gone.
Man, it really sounds like they optimized the horror out of the game, right? We've said many times, players will optimize the fun out of the game, but this sounds like a designer optimized the horror out of the game. And the shame is, you haven't said anything that sounds like a bad mechanical decision. It just sounds like a bad mechanical decision in this context, which is not, to your question, in service of the brand.
Right. And that's the thing where I'm like, huh, where I'm like, this is fine. All of these mechanical decisions, I'm sure they listened to their audience and they were like, okay, they didn't like this. They don't. And I was talking to, a friend of mine, and he was like, I think I would like this game better because the first game, I was always so worried about making a decision that would have this broad sweeping impact, and then I'd have to live with that forever, and I was like, you see, I loved that about the game,
You're both pointing to the same plate of food and they're like, I don't know. And you're like, this is my favorite dish.
Exactly. Right. One of the other things that they did that, again, is a good mechanical choice is that if you have, I think, less than 10% hit points at the end of a battle, it'll knock it up to 10%. It will bump your health back up. Right. So that way you don't start on death's door in an encounter. Right. But also, that means that there were times where somebody was at really low health, and I didn't bother healing them. I healed the person that had more health because the other person was going to get free health, and it would have just been wasted, right? And then as the carriage moves, your entire party heals a little bit, which is great because that means that you get a little bit more hit points, and you're a little bit more robust, and your run will go a little bit longer, and you'll get to make more interesting combat decisions, But that don't make no sense, right? So
it's not horror.
It's not horror. Yeah, this is a fun action adventure game that has again, now the narrator's the same, and I love that guy's voice, and I love the creepy things he says, So that's there, but it is absolutely God, I feel like that it's what it is? It's the difference between Alien and Aliens.
Mm-hmm.
Where it's just an Alien, it was oh my God, it's so terrifying. And now in Aliens, it's look at all the aliens. And you're like, this isn't horror.
And this is, I think this is an interesting question about service to the brand, because I think someone on we're going to call them the Darkest development team, they could make a genuine argument that their brand is the spookiness, right? It's the art style, it's the mechanics, some of the higher level mechanics, it's the music, it's the cool narrator who says the creepy things. They got a person on staff who does all their creepy one-liner writing, right? That's a perfectly reasonable argument to say our brand is not gothic horror. It is gothic horror colored paint. And it so happened that in the first game, all of these mechanics also really supported gothic horror, right? It wasn't just gothic horror paint. It was actual stone with actual, moss growing on the side. And now it's a vinyl sticker on a modern sheetrock wall. But there are people who could say, but that's what I want. I want all of the insulating conveniences of modern housing construction. I just like the way the brick and moss looks, but I don't want to have bugs living in the moss. Like that's not what I'm here for. So it's like, if you find yourself in your exact position where you're like, but I was here for the bugs in the moss on the 2,000-year-old stone, and now this is just a picture of 2,000-year-old stone, then it's like, you look at them like they're crazy and they look at you like you're crazy, because you're both so sure that you were right about what the brand meant and what a sequel would mean if it was in service to the brand. So for you, that is in service to the brand because you are now unsure of yourself.
There you go. But yeah, I was talking to when I was talking to a friend, I was like, this again, so like if you're thinking about going out and buying Darkest Dungeon 2, I mean, go check it out. I am enjoying it greatly. Like, it is, and I would say I probably am getting more joy out of playing it, like more of the joy emotion, but like none of the other emotions that I was like showing up to before. But this is not the darkest dungeon; it is the dimmest dungeon.
Man, I have to talk about Black Mesa, but that was you've just like got that finisher in you. Like you're just always, any moment could be the end of the conversation. We are still going to talk about a whole other video game, but if somebody wanted to turn the episode off right now, I'd understand.
You should just put the ending music there and be like, oh no, wait, we got to talk about this other thing.
We are going to talk about Black Mesa. So last episode, I did my mini review on Half-Life, and I said honest things that I think I supported with evidence that were negative, and we got some very reasonable, dude, are you serious feedback about that. And
interesting.
Well, and what was really,
I'm glad it was you and not me. I played I played Outer Worlds and I loved it, so
well, and
that's
what
all
I really
you. I would have loved the game.
What I really appreciate about the people that are in our community is everyone said, like, all the things you said are true. However, have you considered this other thing? So there were two critical takeaways that I want to mention right at the top. One is the game, the original Half-Life that I played is like the modernized Steam version, but it is still built on the older engine, and it is still like got weird dated problems, right? So like nothing I said was untrue, but if those things don't bother you, then all of the goodness is there. And if the slippery movement and the high difficulty, like if that doesn't bother you, then rock on, right? Which I tried to communicate last time, so I think that came across, but just in case it didn't. The other thing is there is a fan-made ground-up rebuild of the game called Black Mesa, and it is literally just Half-Life 1 from start to finish with a few small tweaks, and then I think like one or two large tweaks where like a level was known to be designed poorly, so they like cleaned it up a little. But in virtually every way that matters, it is the exact same thing, but built on a more modern engine with slightly newer graphics, better sound, right? A little bit more control over some of the input things. So it plays more like a more modern game, right? It doesn't play like a hyper modern game. It doesn't feel like it just came out, right? It feels like it came out in the like early to mid 2000s, even though it came out in like, I think 2015 or something. What's wild about it, just like its backstory, is it's so much better than the version Valve made. They let the developers charge money for it. Like,
nice.
Half-Life, made by Valve and in the Steam store, is a game you can buy, and so is Black Mesa, which is a game in the Steam store that you can buy that was super not made by Valve. It is hilariously made by a group called the Crowbar Collective.
Well, I mean, they knew what they were doing.
Yeah. So I am essentially going to do like a quick re-review of Half-Life, having now played Black Mesa, because spoilers, if you didn't play the original Half-Life, don't just play Black Mesa, because it still has some of the same problems, but it doesn't have the like unplayable breaking problems that I felt like the original Half-Life had, for me, having no nostalgia goggles for it. Some of the things that are different that do legitimately help is the audio is just so much better, right? Like I complained a lot about like the balance of music and sound effects and environmental audio, and it's just not balanced well because it was balanced for like tinny 1990s PC speakers, and this is balanced for like a modern PC setup or a modern, gaming handheld like Steam Deck or whatever. So the audio is just better across the board. Like there's just no way around it. It's better in every conceivable way. And it seems like they actually reused most of the original audio. They just cleaned it up a little bit and balanced it way better, right? So even though you're not, in a lot of cases, you're not getting different sound effects, certainly not different dialogue, it just hits the ear better, right? Which, for if you're going to play like an 8 to 15 hour game, like that is nice to have that be less grating. The graphics being more like early PS2, original Xbox era, like just feels a lot better because they're still blocky and things still move in kind of a blocky way. Like it is a very faithful recreation of the game, but now it feels more like, oh, you could go back and play Black Mesa, right? Like it doesn't feel like, oh geez, this game sure did come out in the 90s and the movement is weird and they originally designed it for keyboard and mouse and I'm using a controller and they super don't love that, right? This is a game that felt perfectly reasonable on a controller. They still have all of the stupid platforming segments you have to do, but now they're like actually approachable. Combat sequences are still, I would argue, overwhelming because you just get rushed by enemies and they're all over the place, but you can still move quickly and you can flank and spin and, aim your gun and stuff. And I'm sure with keyboard and mouse, it'd be even easier to like move and do precision aiming at the same time. The game also has auto aiming and you can turn it on and off in a menu. I wish there was actually like a button combination you could do for it. At least with a controller. I don't, maybe there was a keyboard button, but like there were segments where I was like, I don't want to do this hard segment. Like this is a super hard battle segment and I don't care because I'm not big on first person shooters. So like I will just turn on the auto aiming to get through this sequence and then, turn it back off and like move about the world. And there's actually a couple times that you have to turn the auto aiming off to move about the world because the auto aiming is sticky and almost all of the bosses are like, you deal with them through the environment, right? So it's like, oh, this giant monster, you have to like get the power back on to this thing and then it will electrocute them and that's what defeats them. So that's cool. But if you are trying to run through the room the monster is in so it does not murder you and your camera is locked to the monster, so you begin strafing around it in circles.
Nice. That's this isn't what I want.
Yeah, that's not what I want at all. So it's super obvious when that's happening though, and it's easy to deal with. I do appreciate some of the things they modernized, that there are way more, as far as I could tell, right? There are way more NPC models. So now instead of like one security guard, 2 scientists, and like 1 administrator, there's like a handful of security guards and a handful of scientists, right? So it just makes, there's still a ton of repetition, right? The voice lines are still the same voice lines, or at least it seems like they are. But it just makes the world feel a little less ridiculous. And like, that's not a huge thing, but like, it's nice. One of the things that came across in Black Mesa that I just didn't really play long enough to appreciate is, picture in your mind what the world of Portal looks like, right? What is the defining color of that world?
Laboratory white.
Laboratory white, right? Just immaculately clean, right? Which is why Portal 2 is so shocking, because you see the facility like all screwed up.
Well, and that's the thing too with Portal, is that it's shockingly clean, except once in a while when you see like kind of behind the curtain, you're like, hey, which really raises your cognitive dissonance.
Right. The Black Mesa laboratory is like, considering they obviously have infinite funding from some shadow government agency or something, they don't take real great care of their offices. Like basically you start in the lab that Gordon works in, and then the aliens, and then you eventually are trying to escape the lab to get to a different part of the facility so that you can figure out what's going on and stop the invasion, right? You find out, spoilers, I guess, you find out along the way that like aliens have now been brought to Earth because humans were using this teleportation technology to go to their world and take some of their stuff. right? And so a lot of the advanced technology that we have in the Black Mesa facility is really stolen alien technology, right? And so more and more aliens are now coming through, and like whole crafts, like they look kind of like big manta rays and they fly, and it's kind of cool. So there's a problem, right? And ultimately you have to then go there and stop them, right? And so some of the scientists help you along the way. Some of the things they do to make that like weird sort of cognitive dissonance with Portal, because I just know the Portal games a lot better, is everything, it just seems like kind of cheap and busted. And I know like there's been some explosions and like some of the facility has crumbled, but even the parts that haven't are just like kind of lame. It's like, well, no wonder GLaDOS is making fun of them all the time. Like the Aperture Science facility, the old Aperture Science facility that you see in the second game is barely as run down as some of the like currently working laboratories. Like the only place that's even halfway like nice and kept nice is like the stupid meeting rooms for executives. And you would think with all the terrifying alien teleportation technology, they would like, care a little more. Just, you want somebody to drop a test tube of alien acid and it eats infinitely through the floor. Like, it's just, I don't know. It was a striking difference.
Yeah. No, that is interesting. It sounds like that GLaDOS's Aperture Science was made with pharmaceuticals technology and or pharmaceuticals money, and Black Mesa was made with environmental chemistry money.
No way you're speaking from experience there.
Nope. No, I'm speaking from tons of jaded experience walking around like a nice sterile pharmacy lab and then going back to my lab where like the ceiling tiles were falling out. Yes.
So on the point of ludonarrative dissonance, about halfway through this game, I started suffering that in a way that I was having to force myself to suspend. And this would have happened with, original Half-Life if I'd gotten this far. But when I got to about the halfway mark in Black Mesa, I realized I did not yet have an understanding of why Dr. Gordon Freeman, who is like a 27-year-old PhD from MIT, is also like a tireless super soldier with highly precise aim with a variety of firearms, including alien weaponry he has never seen before. Like, it's just...
He's also a doomsday prepper. I
was literally waiting, like, when is the shoe going to drop? Like, when is it going to turn out that, like, I'm possessed by an alien spirit, or I'm like a Manchurian candidate? Like, when are they going to explain to me why I am this good at stuff? And it turns out you just are. Like, it's just because it's fun to make a video game where you run around and shoot a bunch of evil government Marines, and you shoot a bunch of invading aliens, and you try to protect scientists and security guards, which never lasts, by the way. Something just to, tie this back a little bit to your Darkest Dungeon horror experience is this game and Black Mesa, the better graphics and the better audio actually help drive this a little bit more than Half-Life could, which is not its fault. There are a lot of times where you're walking down a hallway and there's like a barricaded door to an office you can't get into, but you can see through the glass windows, and there's like feet hanging out of a vent because the person is being pulled in by some terrible monster that is eating them. And you just hear blood curdling screams, and then blood and organs comes like shooting out, right? You find scientists and security guards in all these like horrific positions, which is used mechanically as a way to like give you ammo, give you health packs because it's laying next to their corpse, right? But there's a lot of, I'm not in a good situation here, right? There's a lot of like things have gone sideways, and as the game goes on and you learn, oh, it's not just some aliens and it's not just in the facility, it's like everywhere. And like this is like a worldwide problem, which led me to the question, is the world destroyed in Portal because of the alien invasion in Half-Life? And I don't actually know if that's true, and I don't know what the story is in the later Half-Life games, so like maybe that canonically would not have made any sense. But at this moment, knowing what I know about Portal 1 and Portal 2, and knowing what I now know about Half-Life 1, I was like, I could see how these games exist in the same universe, because the Aperture Science facility is all underground, so they were insulated from the alien invasion, but they're still on the planet where it happened, and that was bad.
Right. Yeah. No, that is That is interesting. And I could definitely see, like, when they made the first Half-Life, right, is that like the big, so to take a sidestep and talk about work for a little bit, as everybody loves, is that we're working on revising this like big overarching document, right? And like I got like this first draft done, and person's like, oh, maybe we could add this or maybe we could add that. I'm like, yeah, maybe, but if we keep trying to add all of this stuff, we're never going to publish it, right? We're just going to keep adding and adding and adding, and then we'll tweak and tweak and tweak. Let's just get this big thing out, and then maybe revise it in a year or so, right? I say all of that to say that, to me, I think that when they made Half-Life, the big jump was like Doom, but with a narrative, and people were like, what? And then they didn't think of like, yeah, okay, Doom, but with a narrative, got it. And then somebody said like, hey, are we going to explain why Gordon Ramsay, like, or yeah, right?
Just roll with it.
Yep. Why this guy? I mean, Gordon Ramsay would make more sense, right? Like with him being like wild, like trained with guns and anything.
Well, the ludonarrative dissonance there is that I would never believe Gordon Ramsay is a silent protagonist.
Anyways, but why Gordon is like Dr. Gordon is like why he's this superhuman, master of arms, and it's just like, dude, just okay, yeah, we'll get to all of that stuff right now, though. Doom, but with a story, right? So
yeah. And to that specific design goal, which I would say is probably exactly what they were attempting to do, they nailed it, right? The world is engrossing. You're always like right on the cusp of getting a little more information. Several times they go to the well of a person is about to say something useful to you and then gets shot or eaten by an alien or something, because the government, they're not there to help, right? They're there to clean up the secrets. And the aliens are there to invade. So like everyone is working against you. I did not finish the game, and I'll talk about that in a second, but I got way further. I got to about that 80% mark. And one of the things from the previous conversation that I wanted to make sure I circled back on, because it is very specific, that I didn't have a good comment about this because I hadn't gotten far enough in the game, in Half-Life 1. You asked about like EVE, like can you make enemies fight other enemies? And in the first little bit of the game, it's like mostly cinematic little moments, right? You go into a room, and if you wait a minute, you will see that the aliens and the Marines are fighting, and that moment plays out, and then you go in, and whatever's left is what is actually the encounter for Gordon, right? But no. The further you go in the game, the more, because the invasion is getting worse and the Marines are failing harder because you are killing a bunch of them and aliens are killing a bunch of them. So you end up in more and more and more circumstances where you, the player, get to decide, am I going to like try to run through this while they're fighting each other and just let them continue to duke it out? Am I going to try and kite somebody over here, and so the aliens will start fighting them, and then maybe I can kind of run away? Because it is sci-fi horror, but it does have some of those choices where you're like, I can get my health back and I can get more ammo, but like, I don't know when. Like, maybe I should avoid this encounter if I can do something clever to avoid this encounter. Once or twice you end up in circumstances where they actually encourage you to like sneak through a room, and then a cinematic thing will happen where it's like, I never would have been able to defeat all these Marines, but when I get to the right, when I step on the panel that triggers the story to continue, aliens come in and now they're fighting, and I run while they're doing their thing, right? But there are also these specific ceiling enemies that like, they have like a little dangly tongue thing, and if you touch it, it's sticky. It's kind of like a mimic, right? And you get sucked up into the ceiling. You can 100% kite anything into that. You can make a Marine walk into it. You can make another zombie walk into it. Aliens, right? But the like zombie head crab guys. If there isn't another enemy around, you can pick up like a barrel or something and put it on the tongue thing, and then it will distract it, because it won't eat the barrel, but it will distract it long enough for you to walk underneath it, and then it realizes it doesn't have a live victim and it spits the barrel back out, right? So I could see the beginnings of it early in the game. It wasn't clear how much more they were going to evolve that within a single game, and the answer was a lot. There's actually a tremendous amount of depth to not just how you traverse through the world, but how the other actors in the world interact with you and how they interact with each other, which honestly raised my opinion of the game substantially. Like, there is a lot more thought put into it than was evident, right, at the time. I'm sure in 1998, people were probably like, wow, you can just, this one enemy like might fight that other enemy. By the 50% mark, there are these giant like Scottish Highland battles of Marines and aliens and ships and tanks and all kinds of crazy crap. Like, so much going on. It was actually pretty impressive.
It's not Half-Life. It is the Black Mesa. Sorry, I know that's not where we're ending it, but like I had another ending bump.
Yeah, no.
So you gotta let me know when we're ending it, and then I'll throw that one in.
Yeah, there you go. So, you know, I said, did Half-Life hold up, or did it need nostalgia goggles? And I settled on full nostalgia goggles, right? Because it just, for me, too hard, too slippery, not my cup of tea. I'm not going to finish Black Mesa, but it's not because there's anything wrong with the game. It's because it got to a point where I was like, the level of first-person shooter skill that the game is starting to ask me to be capable of, I'm just not interested in acquiring enough to get the last 10% of the story, which is a little bit of a bummer, but like, that's a me thing, right? Like, I'm just not that interested in becoming better at the mechanics as they are available in the game. I could do God mode. I could do, you know, give me more ammo, give me more health, and just kind of like take each room at full Gordon, even though you're not expected to do that. But I was just like, no, you know what? I understand the whole story now, like all the parts that matter. I've seen that the original game was hampered for me by its controls, not because there was anything wrong with like the level design or the world design. I would absolutely recommend this game. No nostalgia goggles required. Know that you are getting into a difficult experience, because there's normal and then like hard and then like big hard, right? Whatever. But like, I played on the lowest difficulty, which is normal, and I died so much. Like, so much. And it only sets you back a little bit, right? Quick saving is super easy and it's really fast and it's not a big deal. But like, I eventually just was like, okay, like I'm good, right? This game is worth playing. I'm glad that I came back and essentially got a second bite at the apple by this incredible fan project, which hilariously is more expensive than the original game from the original producers, but it's worth it. So I get it. But I have now seen what I wanted to see of Half-Life, and I feel good about it.
Excellent. So it is not Half-Life 3. It is the dimmest dungeon.
The curtain falls. The music plays. The credits roll. Then it all fades to black. And you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone. There's no player 2 there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creep in with the edge of a smile. You realize again what you lost for a while. You're gonna think back much less